Hi, everyone. I want to share a little bit about my story and my journey with you today and some advice. Before I start, I would like to thank the panel from HOSA for inviting me to talk and to share my experience with all of you, especially Julia for recruiting me and talking to me and organizing all this panel. Well, my name is Juliana Camargo. Um, I'm a bachelor in nutrition science, or here in the US can be also be referred as dietetics and nutrition. I also have a master in public health and a PhD in medical nutrition. And right now I'm a postdoctoral fellow in translational science in a lab that works with cancer, exercise, endocrinology, and nutrition. So a little bit about myself. As you can notice by my accent, I'm not here from the US. I'm actually from Brazil. So I was born in Brazil and I live in Brazil until my doctorate. And that's when I moved here to Kansas City. And it's my pleasure to share a little bit about my journey with you today. So what was my motivation to enter in the medical field? So my entire family, nobody is in the medical field. So my parents have their own business in Brazil. They own a small business, and my other family members also work in industry or with business overall. Um, I'm the first person in my family to finish from my close family. I'm the first one to finish college, master, and I'm the only one in my entire family with a PhD. What, but beyond of saying all that, what motivated me to go to the medical field was, well, a lot of things were regarding like my childhood. So my dad had a close friend that he was a dentist. And as a kid, I would always see, and I thought it was, so cool to see him with all those tools. And I was a kid that I was not afraid to see blood or, I was fascinated by the human body. And then growing up, I always had this idea. I was like, oh, study the human body is cool. Um, Working with health would be cool. And then when I was in high school, I actually had a professor in Brazil that he had this program that he would take us to a university in Brazil to see the different areas, and especially in health and science, because he was a biology professor in high school. And then I went to the university, and I remember one of the places that they took us was the anatomy lab. And a lot of people, like from my classroom, they're like, oh no, like bodies and all that. And for me, I found it fascinating, the idea to study the human body. And I went to the university and I saw people like talking about, oh, I saw this patient today. So I was like, oh, this is so cool. So initially, my only idea about like medical field was medicine. So for a while, I was like, oh, I want to study medicine. I want to study medicine. Um, but the story of being like a medical student in Brazil, I don't know if it is the same as here in the US, but I can share a little bit about my journey and why I changed my mind from medicine to actually dietetics and nutrition. But my main motivation was my fascination, for biology and for studying the human body. And also this professor from high school, which was the person who first inspired me to pursue a career in health. Well, I want to share a little bit about my journey until the postdoc, what I'm doing today. So as I told you before, my expectations during high school until my senior year was to study medicine. And I had like very clear on my mind because I wanted to be OBGYN. Um, and I wanted to do surgeries with women, and I was like all fascinated about that. And throughout my journey, I changed my mind. So as I was mentioning before, I'm from Brazil, and in Brazil, most of the so it's a little bit different than here. So in Brazil, we have what is called the public universities and the private universities. So in the public universities, you don't have tuition. So you do your whole like college education for free if you get into a public university. But it's not so easy to get into a public university, especially depending on the area, because you need to take several exams, which is different than how it is here. Because here is standardized. You take an exam, you have a score, and apply to different universities. In Brazil, no, you have to apply for each single university. It is changing now, but this is how it was when I was about to enter college. And medicine was one of the hardest to get in, especially from the state I'm from. So I knew, because I had to move from schools a lot uh, throughout my life for different reasons, because my parents had financial struggles. So I had to change schools, like from private school to public school, and public school from private school. That the quality of the education changed a lot. So I knew I had a lack um, of qualification to be able to get into medicine in a public school. So then I had the mother of one of my friends that she actually went to college, that she talked to me. She was like, there are other areas in healthcare. You don't necessarily need to go through medicine. And she was like, and actually you can enjoy even more than medicine. And I was like, oh well, I'm gonna, search. So then I started to search the different fields in healthcare, because in my mind I only knew, as I mentioned before, so to be a dentist, physician, and a nurse, because those were the healthcare professionals that I had some contact in the past or I knew about. Um, so then that was when I learned about dietetics and nutrition. And I started to learn everything that a dietitian could do, the different areas that I could work with patients in a hospital or in a clinic, or I could work in a food service as well, depending on what I decided. And I was like, oh, this is cool. Like with athletes, I was like, this is cool because, it's a broad field. And then I actually like reached a dietitian in my hometown, and I talked to her to understand a little bit more about the career itself. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And especially because that's a personal interest as well. Like in my family, we had, this close relationship with food, learning recipes. So as most of Latinos, I'm very mixed. So part of my family from my dad's side is Italian. And from my mom's side, it's everybody from Brazil, from the northeast of Brazil. So both of my grandmas had, these special family recipes to cook, and they would always put me to help with them to cook. So I was like, oh, the idea of helping people to live better through food, through what they eat, was fascinating to me. And then I was like, oh, and I can incorporate two things that I really like, because I always enjoy, learning about food, trying new types of food. I think we all enjoy eating. Um, but yeah, so then I decided, and then I applied for dietetics and nutrition, like in public schools, in private schools. I didn't get into a public school, but I got into a private school, and I got a scholarship, which helped me with the tuition. So I did dietetics and nutrition. With the time, I loved my career even more. When I graduated, I worked as a clinical dietitian in a clinic in Brazil. I was working mostly with children and also with women. And then throughout my career, I also work with schools preparing like meal planning for school meals. I work with athletes in Brazil, so I work with the team from gymnastics, artistic gymnastics. And but then with the time, I started, one of the things that brought me through science was actually childhood obesity. So in the clinic, as I mentioned, I was starting to see a lot of children were obese, and that was something that was not common in the past in Brazil when I was a child, for example. And I started to see children with 10, 11 years old getting to my clinic that they had hypertension already or developing type 2 diabetes. And I was like, what is going on? Like, why this is happening? And I started to see more and more. So I started to get very curious about it. And I remember talking with one of my mentors from college because I did a initiation to research also through college. And she was like, Juliana, like I always thought, like that you have a profile to be a scientist and do research on childhood obesity. Why don't you try like a master uh, in public health? And then I was like, what is a master? And, like I started to get to learn more, like what is the difference of being a master? And then I learned that I could do actually research, that I could continue with the clinic, but also I could work as a researcher and then work in a university and give classes with the time. And I was like, okay, so then seems easy, right? It was a long pathway. But in my university, like in my city in Brazil, as I mentioned, there's a private and public university. So in the public university, the same for the master. It's free. You also have, to do an exam to be qualified. And then depending on your score, you also can have a tuition that is like an income that helps you, uh, with your bills. And then I would have to teach in the university, like support teaching and doing research. So I would be like full time as a master's student. And then I studied a lot. So I would work during the day in the clinic. At the time, I had three different jobs and I would study at night. But I really wanted to get into the master in the university. It's excellent. It's one of the best of the country. So I studied really, really hard for 1 year and then I got accepted and I was in the third place. And then to get the tuition, it was like the first two. And I was like, well, I'm going to do the master, but I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do, but I'll find a way. It ended up that the person who was second place, he was a nurse full time and he didn't want to change his work schedule, to be like a full time master in public health. So he dropped. And then because he dropped, I got into the second place and I was able to be a full time master student. Well, I think I was very blessed that that happened to me. My mentor, uh, she worked with food security, and I was in a laboratory of food security in Brazil. And a lot of the research that she would do would be actually in the favelas in Brazil, which are very poor neighborhood, that we would follow the families to see like if receiving the support from government, that is kind of like similar to a SNAP, how that impact on the development of children related to malnutrition, but also to obesity. And then I developed my own research, which was to assess um, the prevalence of childhood obesity in children in elementary schools in my hometown. And then I fell in love with research, writing articles, doing analysis, and like learning what can happen, what are the possible causes. And then throughout my master, that was 2 years, I learned about an opportunity that the Brazilian government had at the time, to study your PhD abroad. And then at the time, I knew like how to speak and write in English, because I was like, it's a long story, but I can tell you. But anyway, I knew how to speak and write English and also Spanish because part of my family, as I mentioned, I'm very mixed, but my dad is part Italian, part Spaniard. And then my dad was the one who motivated me to learn Spanish. And also because Brazil is surrounded by countries who speak Spanish. So, like, it's a good thing to speak Spanish for work. and because not all Brazilians speak Spanish. But anyway, so then I applied for this scholarship while I was doing my master's. It was a long journey. And then I can tell in details another time for those who are interested. But then I got accepted and I decided to come to Kansas City because it was a PhD that was focused on medical nutrition. Because like doing my master was like, oh, I want to learn better, how to measure diet and then how can impact on actually biomarkers, like cells in the body. So I decided to come to Kansas City because it was one of the few PhD programs that were that deep on nutrition. And I came here, and then for my surprise, I started to use my Spanish even more because I focused on doing my research with the Latino community. So because I was also able to speak Spanish and knew about, even though I'm from Brazil, but there are a lot of similarities with other Latino cultures. There are a lot of differences, but there are a lot of similarities as well. And I started to study. So for my PhD, I focused on the Latino community, and then my research was more towards pregnant women, which made sense studying children and then moving to pregnant women. I graduated on my PhD, and then I got a offer to do a postdoc, which a postdoc is basically like a trainee for those who think about business, or it's like you're training to be a more prepared researcher. So right now I am a researcher, but at the same time, a, a good chunk of my time is focused, to actually write papers and like develop my new research with mentoring. Okay, I talked a lot, but I hope you enjoy my journey. Well, if I could talk to Juliana during high school, what advice I would give her to prepare for dietetics and nutrition, I would tell her learn chemistry and learn chemistry very well, learn biology very well, and don't be afraid to explore. Because I think sometimes, um, at least for me, high school, I was very focused student, and but at the same time for some things I would have a narrow minded of what people could do on areas. So I would tell her like to learn those, especially those two things very well. um but also, like, one thing that I will tell her is like keep going on learning a new language. Like, don't. I think this is something that I did, and I'm glad that I did it because it impacted a lot on my career now as a postdoc. So expectations versus reality in dietetics and nutrition. So when I entered, my expectation was I thought initially I thought I was going to work in a hospital or in a food service, and I really thought I was going to enjoy food service. And throughout college, like, I didn't like at all. I was like, this is not for me. I'm interested more in interacting with people. Um, and then once I graduated, I thought I was going to be working in a hospital as a clinical dietitian in the hospital. And then I fell in love with science throughout my career. And then right now, I still have contact with patients for the type of research that I do, and I enjoy. And I think everything that I do, especially for the type of research that I do, I'm thinking on how to make, the experience that the patients have better, and also like how they can improve their health through lifestyle. Um, but the reality is that dietetics and nutrition was way broader than I thought. Like, I had a clue, but I had no idea how many possibilities I would have in this field. And I'm very glad I chose it. So the question that the panel shared with us was like, if I stick to what I had in mind when I started dietetics and nutrition, and the answer is no. I changed it. I thought I was going, as I said before, food service and then clinical dietitians in the hospital. I ended up in research, full-time researcher, which I don't regret at all. I think that it's really important to be a clinical dietitian working with patients, but also like research is the core that makes, even for dietitians to have more representativity and also like to give more value. And nutrition is a field that is like growing so much and showing even more the impact that it has on the healthcare field. Um, and but I like it. I like clinical and sometimes I even miss it to see patients. Um, but I don't regret to move to research and yeah. So this is what I have to share with you all. And yeah, and the journey was like I think it started to naturally. Of course, there was a lot of hard work from my part, but the things naturally started to get connected and linked um, to get to to where I am today. So, advice for future healthcare. Advices that I would give: number one, because that impact my career a lot, is if you can learn a new language beyond of English, if you only speak English. I know there are some people here in the US, that grow up in a house that is bilingual because their parents are immigrants, for example. Some people don't, but focus on learning a new language because US is such a diverse country and that is very helpful. For me, I grew up speaking Portuguese and then I learned English because this is how, the economy works in Brazil. If you speak another language, you have more job opportunities. And then I learned Spanish as well because of my dad, and I'm very glad for his advice. And yeah, and I think in US, Spanish, I think would be the most, you know, common second language to learn. But to be honest, any other language would be helpful. And I think learning a new language beyond of like getting a new skill, I think also you start to see the world with a different view because speaking a language is more than just speaking, but you start to understand more about the culture and the perspective of somebody, that is different than you. And I think for healthcare to have this empathy to understand the other side, it's crucial for bedside manners and, even to understand the needs of your patient. So yeah, learn a new language. Okay, so how do I balance school, studying, and everyday life? It's a challenging because there is also, and with the time you start to have more and more things to do. Um, for me, one thing that I learned was to do the bullet journal. And this is very helpful for my life, my work life, and my overall life. I started, the bullet journal helped me to have priorities for what I have to do during my day, and then also what is important for me, especially I think for school and studying. For me, like writing projects, my work is to write a lot all the time. So that helps me, to give a goal and timeline. And then for my everyday life, three things that I focus to do it. It's, that's like, I'm a dietitian, so eat well, which it requires dedication, even though I learned what is eat well, exercise and sleep. Um, so like exercise, I started to build a routine, to exercise. I schedule the time that I go. I leave, my tennis shoes separated and my clothes. Right now I'm training to run my first 5K. I'm not an athlete, but I'm motivated to do it and I'm actually enjoying to learn, running and the schedule. even though I have pain here and there. I'm not that young, and also sleeping. So like I started, to have sleep habits of going to the bed at a certain time, uh, because if you're studying, you need to refresh your brain, and that's important. One thing that I still cannot do, I have difficulties to take power naps, because this is how I am, but this is something that I want to learn to do, because the few times that I did, it helped me a lot. Like, I was like writing this article and my brain was like, like breaking. And then I stopped, I took a power nap, and then like I was a brand new person to write again. It's not always that I can do that, especially if I'm in the university. There's no place that I can hide to go sleep. But it's something that I want to incorporate. But at least at night, I started to build my sleeping routine, and that helps a lot, a lot. So, advice on how I would prepare better for studies. Well, as I said, that's something that I started to incorporate. It's to have a bullet journal and also establish timelines. Like if you study in small chunks, it's easier for you even to understand the information, but to achieve your goal. So I think it's a lot about planning. And how I learned the magical thing named YouTube. There's several great videos about, organizing your schedule, learning about a bullet journal. Actually, my bullet journal is a very simple book. It's nothing fancy or expensive. It's much more on how you organize. And there are even several things that I do on my phone, on my calendar, or, like the to-do list. So I think plan ahead, and because that is very helpful, and that is something if you take throughout your career will help you a lot. Student debt, for sure, that's a problem. So as I mentioned, I was very fortunate that throughout my career, at least in Brazil, I had several scholarships. I feel like throughout my career I had scholarships from college to masters to doctorate. It was kind of tricky because I had a scholarship, but then because I decided to stay and do not go back to Brazil, now I have a student debt. So I'm paying a student debt right now, um, which is a lot of money, but I think it's worthy. And then advices that I would give, like look for scholarships, talk to people who are in academia who had scholarships, or institutions, depending on situation. Or like you can also find jobs in the university while you're studying as a GTA or GRA, side jobs. And one thing that I started to learn not a long time ago, it's about financial planning. So learn how to plan to pay your debt. I'm very interested in finances as well. So there are a few people that I follow online who teach about, paying student loans, and also like how to organize your finances. Um, because if you do, that will help you a lot. And focus to pay your bills. But two things I would say: look for a scholarship. Well, three things actually. So look for scholarships, look for jobs in the university that you can do like side gigs, and learn about like how to organize your finances and get your student loan paid. And there are several like programs that you can apply even for the NIH, depending on which area you decided to go. So there are opportunities. It requires more effort to look like for opportunities, but if you talk to people and do your own research, you're gonna find it. And yeah, and then once you finish, you'll have your career and your job that can help you to pay your debt even faster. So I want to wish you best of luck for future health professionals, regardless of the area that you choose. If you are interested in dietetics and nutrition, I'm available if you want to talk and, to ask questions and, something that you have doubt or that you want, or even schools. I'm available, and thank you for the opportunity and have a great day.